Hello everybody, this is Casey here, and I am going to walk you through the incredible process of making over this fabulous French Rococo armoire. This armoire came to me from Queens, New York. I had it shipped to me, and it came with a whole bedroom set, a king-size headboard, dresser, nightstands, giant mirror. You can see all these fabulous pieces, and you'll notice a feature, you may notice, or a lack of a feature. The armoire, the dressers and nightstands, nothing has any hardware on it. The hardware it's actually just all built in. So the carvings that protrude out, you reach under there, and that's how you pull open the drawers and such. And so that's just this whole set has been amazing to work on, and I'm going to walk you through how I restyled this armoire. We started out by completely deep cleaning the whole piece. So when I clean a piece, I will clean it. Sometimes I will use, most often what I use is Meyer's cleaning solution and just a sponge or a cloth. And then, and if I don't have that on hand by chance, then I will go ahead and use vinegar and water. So after the cleaning was done, I went ahead and did a scuff sanding all over, as well as applied a liquid Jasco, or it's a sander deglosser, which you brush on, and when you apply a deglosser, you want to use circular motions. You just apply it with a chip brush. After it's dried, it can take anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 minutes to dry, and then you wipe it off. This set right here, it's pretty old, and it had been sitting for quite a while. I am estimating that this set is from the 1970s. It could be from the 80s. It's just my estimate. I know they're pretty hard to come by, like they are out there, but this ornate, you just don't see them often anymore, like this particular style. And so taking the time to do your prep work all over, getting all of the pieces, like every nook and cranny, with the cleaning, with the Jasco, it definitely sets your painting up for success. And so now it is time to apply my top coat. For my top coat, I won't have the names of every single color of paint that I use, because a lot of it, when I get into some of the later colors, I do a lot of custom blending and mixing. But the name of this paint, this is a Krylon chalky finish paint, and the name of this base coat color is called Thunderstorm. It's by Valspar. So I just went into Lowe's and I looked through the Valspar color swatches. I picked out Thunderstorm, and I took it to the paint counter and said I'd like this color in the Krylon chalky finish paint. And so I applied that as my base coat, and then I applied this mint green over it. Now, I'm going to be honest here. When I had first envisioned the makeover for this armoire, I really thought it was going to be mint green, like just a faded vintage green with some accents of ivory and gold and some pale roses and very pastel. And when I got done and applied the mint green, I'm like, it looks like a giant wedding mint. It was too much of just a pastel on this. So even if I had gone and broken up the colors with some detail, it wouldn't work. So then I went to some darker colors, and on the darker colors, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to apply these and then get started on like doing my layering and the old world finish. Sometimes a piece will tell you what it wants to be. I know I'm moving really fast here, but that's okay. We're going to slow down. So I want to let you know that this has a base coat of the Thunderstorm and then the mint green, so we're adding layers. Then I came in with a dark, kind of like a dark turquoise sea blue green color, and added that on. I'm sorry, y'all, I don't remember the name of the color on this particular one. of the dark color. And then I started coming in with my Thunderstorm with a little bit of gold. With on the gold, it's Rust-Oleum Gold Metallic. Started adding some ivory to it, and now you're going to see the layers. On the layers of this, I'm really using, I'd had probably on this armoire like 7 to 8 different colors that I'm using. So you can see right here we have that dark, like that real rich turquoise, royal blue type color. And then I'd had an olive green over it. And so I'm going in circular motions. Now, I have watched many tutorials on like an old world style. I've seen people use just regular stippling, which is just dabbing the brush, just kind of like hitting the brush like straight on onto your piece of furniture. I've seen people use a cloth technique where they dip their cloth into paint and then go ahead and dab that on like you're blotting. And I have done that on different pieces. I've seen people use sponges, and it just like, to me, I never got the result that I wanted using like those different techniques. So what I started out here is I definitely have my layers, and I think that anytime you work with layers of color, when you are going for an old world, French country, very just antiqued, beautiful vintage appeal, where to me, I see it as there's been layers of paint applied to the piece of furniture over the years. You're going for like a dappled sun effect. So if a piece of furniture sits in a room where it has a lot of sunlight on it, you're going to have some areas where it has some lighter spots and some kind of time-worn appeal. So that's what I'm going with now at this process. I had started out thinking that this armoire, like my initial vision for it, that it was going to be kind of a very vintage mint green with some beautiful detail and a little bit of distressing. And this piece very quickly told me, no, I am not going to be a giant wedding mint. And I'm like, okay, we're going to roll with this and switch gears. And so as I'm applying this over the layers, one thing I want you to know is that I only have a tiny bit of paint on my brush. So I'm like, there is a term, it's called in painting, it's called offloading. So throughout the process of painting this armoire, I offload my paint a lot. So I dip my brush, I'm using a chip brush, and just very lightly into the paint where kind of just a little bit more than the tip has paint on it. And then I will wipe that, like you can offload it onto a cloth, you can offload it onto a piece of wood, another piece of furniture. Sometimes I offload it right onto the floor in front of me because this is my studio and the floor gets a lot of paint on it. So you just, usually though, I use cloths. So I'll dab my paintbrush into the paint can and then dab it 3 or 4 times on a cloth, just offload it onto something. And so right here with just light amount of paint, going in swirls and circles. And I have a lot of people have commented in different groups where I've shared this piece of furniture, this particular armoire, and they said, how do you get that cloud looking effect? And I have never gotten a cloud looking effect, which to me, how I interpret that is just that beautiful, dreamy, vintage, layered, cloudy type look. I have never gotten that just by dabbing my paintbrush with different colors directly onto the armoire. The art of it comes into using your paintbrush in many different angles. So I've used it, you've seen me go on like straight in circles, like right there, straight in circles. in some ways. And it's okay. Like, if you put that on straight in circles, you're like, well, that doesn't look good. That's fine. It's not supposed to look good right now because you're going to come back over this. You're creating different layers of bases, different layers of base coats. And that's probably the wrong terminology to use. I guess the better terminology to use would be you're creating layers of foundations. So if you just stipple, which is just really blotting your brush, like blotting your brush straightforward onto a piece of furniture, it's really hard. I have yet to get, like, trying to do that, like that beautiful, romantic, dreamy, cloudy look. I just have not been able to do that. But when you use your brush in different ways, at different angles, y'all, this is 99-cent chip brush. It's not an expensive product. You don't have to have expensive products to create something beautiful. But it's how you use the products that you have on hand that make a difference. And another thing that really stood out to me during the process of redesigning this armoire is how important it is the different colors that you use. So my primary color palette for this entire armoire consists of different shades or hues of blue, green, like some ivory beiges, some yellows, like deep dark mustard yellows, and then some gold. And then later on some of the detail, I also went ahead and did some copper, which we'll get to later. But intermingling, and you don't want to do all apply all white and then apply all green and then apply all blue. You want to go back and forth, in and out, applying your different shades like every few minutes. I would dip my brush into another can of paint. And if you're worried about, like, I don't want to add, like, if you have some green on your brush and you dip it into a blue can, and you're like, I don't want to pollute my blue paint with green, that's okay. Like, to me, it's not a big deal because I work with a lot of mottled blended colors, so I don't mind if one color mixes a little bit with another color in my paint cans. But if you don't want to do that, just pour them into some little containers, like cottage cheese containers or some little plastic Dollar General store containers where, like, set you out, like, if you have 5 colors, pour a little bit into each container. And I would say a little bit, like a tiny bit, just like maybe the equivalent of 3 or 4 tablespoons of paint. Like, so that much, like that little of paint, because a little will go a long way. So here it is just, I call it blending. Somebody else may call it a different term, but I'm just coming in and I'm softening. Softening, because if y'all remember, this previously had like dark shades of like that dark turquoise blue that you see right there in the front. So I'm coming in and I'm softening it. Also had the olive green, and I want that peeking through, but I just want to soften everything way down. And as I'm doing it, I found, especially through this, like the process of working on this armoire, one thing that I really learned a lot is not working all in the same section at the same time is very helpful. I found that if I tended to work, like, see right here, if I would just stay in that section for like an hour trying to perfect it, all that section would start to look very uniform, all the same. I would have lots of the same color in one area. So I'd work, like, as I was applying it, I would apply a little bit at the bottom, come to the top, move up above to the top portion of the armoire, back down. But if in doing this type of technique, if I stayed in the same little area trying to make one small little area just perfect and move on to another area, I'd found that I start to get areas of just blue, just green, just like I wasn't getting the layers that I wanted. And so, or like the effect that I wanted. So doing a little bit here and like, oh, I've got a tiny bit of green paint left on my brush. I'm going to take it down to this area and dab a little bit on there. And I think the art of it is you're learning to distribute the paint, if that makes sense. You're learning to distribute it. And also, when I would apply the paint, look at this, like this, before and after right here of just this far. That's incredible. From just using your brush at different angles. And so as you would apply it to one area, you work there a little bit and then go ahead and dab your paint, like what's left on your brush. Say I have a little bit of blue or a little bit of green left. So I'm going to go ahead and go up and dab it up on the top part or down by a foot. And okay, it might sound silly, but think of it as I'm spreading the love. So I have a little love here, a little paint here. I'm going to spread it out. And a term that I thought of, or that just like kept coming to my mind while I was doing this, was pulling. So if you, like when you dip your brush into your paint can and you offload most of your paint, so you want just a tiny bit of paint on your brush when you're doing this. Like if you have a glob, like you want to try to avoid that. You shouldn't have a glob. But if you did have a glob, you want to go ahead and really offload that a lot. You want to wipe it on some cloth and go ahead and get it just where you have a tiny bit of paint on it, and then you start dabbing. I hope that I am not getting too tongue-tied for you guys, doing these voiceovers while you're trying to like think on your feet and explain the process while watching the video and communicate what's going on. No, it's a thing to try to get used to on my end. So hopefully just watching what is going on, and that will help you quite a bit. And so I think, to me, some of the main things that I could, like points that I could get across, is you want very little paint on your brush. You don't want to work in one specific area all at once. You see, I'm kind of moving around, and that really helps to avoid having like this uniform consistency, because you don't want like, you want inconsistency for a really, in my opinion, authentic vintage appeal. And so while it's all going to look cohesive at the end, I want to be careful not to be too uniform. And to me, like the colors that you use, having colors that really complement each other, I think you want some dark, dramatic colors. Like if you were going to try this technique, but you wanted to use different colors, like you could do this with some dark, dramatic colors and then some, say like a dark gray or a navy blue. And then if you did something like that, I would come in with a lighter gray, possibly like a cream color and some gold, and that would be a beautiful combination. You could also do this in a beautiful color of pastels of like pinks and rose golds and ivories and light grays and maybe some really pale teals, like that beautiful like palette, like soft, dreamy, romantic palette would look so pretty in this, using this type of technique. And so we're not limited to just one type of color scheme. And I think a great thing that any of us could do to try out a color scheme is to get a board. Just get a plain little board, or if you don't have a board, a piece of cardboard, from a box that maybe like is a foot long or 7 to 8 inches wide. So a good sized piece of cardboard or board, and then try out your color palettes on there. You could get some color samples. You could use some leftover paints that you have, and you could practice on a board or a cardboard box, or really like an old picture. You could practice on just like an art canvas from Walmart or Hobby Lobby. Those are super cheap if you're unsure. But I will say this, if you go ahead and just start doing this on a piece of furniture, paint is forgiving. Like you could see, and you have seen on this particular armoire, like I thought I was going to have, my base coat of that thunderstorm, which is kind of a beigey, and then do a mint green and come in with some detail. And that didn't work. And so I just rerouted. A lot of times, I've heard people say, "Oh, what great vision you have for furniture." And I thought, haha, it's like what I envision a piece to be when I'm starting out or before I get started is not very often what it turns out to be. To me, I think it's just kind of about listening to the piece and what it wants to be. One of the things that I love blue. So later on, I came back and started adding some blues to this, which you'll see. But I have to tell you, I love this color mix right here. To me, it's almost very magical, like enchanted forest type of look with that dark turquoise / royal blue color with that kind of olivey foresty green coming in on it. You mix some little golds in there. You could even come in with like a little bit of tan. I just love that. To me, it kind of looks like an enchanted forest look, but I do love that old world French country look. So I ended up coming back with some medium and light blues and really was lightening it up. And so right here, I'm going along and starting to add my blues, and I'll be coming in the lighter color that I'm using on top of my blues and on top of some of those greens is the Thunderstorm color from Valspar, which I love that for like a neutral color. To me, it's really pretty. It offsets other colors, darker colors really well. It's not too white and bright. Okay, so here I am, and I'm just going back over interchanging my colors. And so I'm working back and forth between kind of those faded greens and the light French blue, kind of a medium light French blue. If there is a great color by Valspar called Lucy Blue, which you can go into Lowe's and get a can of Krylon chalk paint and tell them you want it in Lucy Blue. And it's just a really great medium blue French color. You could choose that or a couple of shades lighter than that even. And I think that you would have a really, really good French blue to work with. So you'll see me offloading my paint. This little wooden cart is a cart that Louis had made for me to hold my paint cans. And I will say that offloading your paint, making sure you're working with a pretty dry brush, that it's not, you don't want it too wet with paint, that makes all of the difference in the world. After I had been painting furniture, I would say for probably like 8 or 9 months or so, after I had done my first ornate piece, it had dawned on me, like, I just knew, like deep down in my heart, I knew that I wanted to paint furniture that belonged in castles. And I love that I was a reader when I was a kid. I love the storybooks, the fairy tales, and just all of the grand stories that I read growing up. And somewhere along the way, I determined, like, that's what I want to do, is unrealistic as it may sound, I want to paint furniture that goes in castles. And then that led to my search for ornate pieces and creating them, and like my effort and striving to create them in ways that would look like they had been sitting in this very old, possibly even abandoned castle or chateau for just decades. And then one day somebody would like buy it and come in and see all this old furniture and dust it off and clean all the walls and the floors and the windows and bring that back to life. And a piece like this had just been sitting there for years waiting for somebody to use it. Like, if that makes sense, that is kind of the aesthetic that I'm going for when I create and strive for styles and designs like this. I've been working back and forth in between Honey Vanilla, color by Valspar, the Thunderstorm color, and then a French blue. And then from time to time, I will go ahead and add a little bit of some green in there as well. But mostly at this point, I've been working back and forth between the blue and the two lighter colors. And at this point, I'm really just like starting to get nearer to the end. I felt that this front area had gotten a little bit too light. So I wanted to go in and add some more dimension and just kind of darken it up. It was a little lighter than what I had wanted. So I'm just going back and taking care of that. And you'll see me, guys, see me like wiping my paint off. So that's just to show you, like dip it in and then wipe it off, wipe it off. You can wipe it off on anything you want to. Just offload a lot of that paint, and that will really help you to avoid having big pools. Or like if you have too much paint on, you put your brush on, all of a sudden you got a glob. And like globs don't work too well when you're trying to do this type. That's why it's important to have your brush just light amount of paint. You're almost kind of dry brushing in some ways. And so, and then also using, in many cases, like pretty feather light touches, as you'll see right there. It's just super light. As you do this, or if you try to recreate something similar or this style, you'll want to, in different areas, like just turn your brush in, at different angles. Use it flat on, sometimes straight on, sometimes go in little swirls or circles, and dip in to the paint, offload, go back again, switch out between colors. That will really help you a lot. And so right here, you can see that just going back and continuing to offload my paint and using a lighter color. This color is the Thunderstorm color. And I decided I really wanted to lighten up the middle, that where the roses are. Just kind of wanted to, just bring some more highlights to it. And so this is back and forth where I'd gone and added some more of the French blue, and then coming back and blending in, getting that mottled look, my lighter colors. And so, and it is a process of going back and forth. Each day, I would come to work and work on this. I don't know how long. It was several days, maybe altogether 5, 6, 7 days working on this, anywhere from 3 to 4, 5, 6 hours a day. It would definitely be, an average. I would say probably 5 hours a day. I think this took me around 30 hours to complete. So definitely had a good amount of time in this. And here I really wanted to have some of that old time worn fading on the top part, kind of like it had been sitting in a big picture window and the sunlight had come on and really like faded out the colors. And so that's what I'm going for there, and adding some highlights and to the detail. And so that's what's going on. I did go over my detail with a lot of the gold gilding wax. It's by Dixie Belle. I'm not sure if I had mentioned before or not, but I order my gilding wax and through Etsy. It's just a good way to get it pretty quickly. I believe Bells and Bows is the name of the shop that I use on Etsy to get a lot of my gilding waxes and different things like that. And so, what do you guys think? Like, how do you think it's coming along so far? I hope that when, this tutorial is over, that you'll leave some comments. You can leave them in the Patreon page and or on the video link. I think probably leaving it on the Patreon page would be like easier for all of us to chat together about it and see what kind of questions that you have. And so that's one important thing that I'd like to share with you as you're watching this tutorial. Like, I'm open to discussing it, like it doesn't have to stop with you just watching the tutorial. If you have questions and if there's things you want to talk about, like, this can be the beginning and we can talk about those things. And I'm definitely going to do my best to be here for you to answer any questions that you might have. I did use the thunderstorm color on these scrolls, and those scrolls right there where I'm working on painting, those are actually the handles for that drawer, and then same for the drawer below. You'd put your hands under there, your fingers under there, and that's how you pull it open. And so ultimately I ended up doing adding those highlight colors to the ornate scrolls and that type of detail. And then later I would go back over it and not really a wash, but kind of a dry brushing over it with some of my gold gilding wax, just to really bring out a little bit of glam, a little bit of that old world French glam. French country really is a beautiful blend and mix of very sophisticated, glamorous, extravagant styles mixed with some time-worn, rustic qualities. And so that's what I love about it so much, is that I think you get the best of both worlds in French country style, because you get the extravagance and the lavishness and the ornate, but then you also get the just the rustic, faded, vintage appeal. So it's a beautiful blend. Like, it's very complimentary, the lavishness plus some rusticness, and best of both worlds for sure, at least in my opinion. And so right now, going back in, very just feather light touches on this, lightening things up. And I do think because the way the sun is shining, like, it might show one side a little lighter than the other, but that's just from how the light is hitting the piece. And I know that the end is in sight, and I'm getting pretty close to the end, and it'll just really be stepping back, taking it all in, seeing what needs to be added and what I need to change. To me, learning to pause and to step back and just take it in, that is like at every little stage, every little phase. So maybe once every few hours, when you're doing a piece that is this detailed. And by detailed, I don't necessarily mean like the ornate style of it, but I mean that, this is a complex way for sure to paint a piece of furniture. Like, it is much more different than if you were just going to paint it all one solid color and then run one other color over the trim. So this is much more complex. So every so often you want to step back and like, what does this need to be just right? And my mom always likes to say, when I do pieces like this, she likes to say, like, how do you know when to stop? I wouldn't know when to stop. And that's a hard question to answer. I can tell right here by looking at this. To me, that's just a phenomenal blend of colors. Like, I love it. And so I know that I'm really, really close to the end. I'm just checking to see, is there a little bit more modeledness I want to add? Is there some colors that's standing out a little bit more in a certain area? Do I need a little more depth? And it's really just determining. And each artist has to determine on their own, am I finished yet? Or do I add a little more? And one of the things that I would do is really compare one side of it to another side. So I would compare the front. And that's where I think it can get a little tricky. Like, is the front look pretty consistent with the sides? Does the top look consistent with the bottom? Like, do I have a pretty good overall theme going? Not that we want, and I had spoken earlier, like, you don't want too much consistency. And what I meant by that was, like, you don't want it to be all layers of blue, then all layers of green, then all layers, like, you want it blended in really well. And so at this stage of it, like I said, the end is in sight. I'm going around making sure, like, do I have more blues on the sides, and then it's a lot lighter on the front. And so going back and just doing some final touches and making sure that it looks cohesive all the way around. And here I am. I just couldn't seem to leave the top alone. All of the ornate characters up there, I mean, they're so grand and so fancy. So I definitely wanted to make sure that I gave them the time that I felt that they deserved, like the attention I felt they deserved. So, and what happened is, and you'll get to see like the result of these layers, it almost looked kind of Romanish, like like just a beautiful fading where you would a little bit of a chippy look, kind of where you would see that very aged aesthetic. And I could not have been more pleased with it. And to me, that was achieved by going back and forth. And so right here, I'm going through dusting everything off, giving it a very, very good dusting. And it has that in my shop. And then after this, what I had done is I had taken, before this, I'd taken a thin, a pad of steel wool and gone through and just lightly sanded, just a small buff sanding all over to make all the edges, like everything, all of the surfaces very smooth to the touch, which did not disrupt, my paint style. It didn't harm it. If you didn't have steel wool, you could use a 220 grit sanding sponge. And so now I'm ready to wax because I finally finished painting. So after going over it with a steel wool, I'm sorry, y'all, I didn't get that part filmed, but it is really just lightly rubbing over it to make it smooth. And then, so I dusted that off with my duster. And now I'm going in, I've made my own wax brush by cutting down a chip brush. And then I am going in with this Retique wax. This is far and away one of my favorite top coats and waxes to use. And this is so easy to use. All you do is brush it on with your chip brush, and then I use a lint-free cloth to wipe it on. Now, I get my lint-free cloths. I buy them from Lowe's in a bag. I want to say there's a whole bunch in a bag for like $10. So they're inexpensive to buy. And you will also have them, like you'll be able to use them for a long time. So you can see the detail right there now that's really like in the light well, how it really stands out and complements that French blue and the mottled greens and grays, just really came out beautifully. So for the wax, we're wiping it on and then we'll wipe it off. And that's what's going on. You just take your time, do it all over. And then on the Retique wax can, it does say that the more you wipe the wax down, the more you buff, the like higher of a gleam that you'll get, which is not like a brassy, glossy, like polyurethane gleam, but just like a really pretty dull gleam that you can kind of see going on right there. And so this is a oil-based wax that definitely helps your furniture to be much more scratch resistant, and you can apply 2 coats of it on, in some cases, in some types of furniture, you may just want to do 1 coat. It's really up to you. And so on this one, this had 2 coats of this wax all over the whole thing. And it's easy to apply. So if you're worried about putting on top coats and stuff, don't be. I do feel like if you're new, you'll learn, and you kind of have to experiment and see what works with you and the type of paint, what works for you and the type of paint that you use, and also the type of furniture that you're using too. But I like this because this particular wax top coat by Retique It, it's my favorite top coat that I've tried to date. And that's because I love how it feels when it's done. It's got a nice, smooth, hard finish. It definitely helps it to be chip resistant. And all of the prep work that that is done before the painting even starts helps your paint job to be so much more successful. Like doing the sanding, like the cleaning, the sanding, applying the liquid sander deglosser, it helps your paint to have so much better adherence and helps it to be harder. And I've had some where I've scratched like my fingernail over the paint, and just to see how scratch resistant it was, and it held up really well. As you guys are watching this, if you have any questions about applying a wax or a top coat, definitely feel free. You can comment in Patreon or even here on this video link if you would like to, and we can chat about it and go from there. I want to say too that I've ordered more expensive wax brushes. I'm not saying that I won't ever order wax brushes again, but this chip brush, cut down, to me has done just as good as a job as applying wax than, the more expensive brushes have. And I use a chip brush just because this piece has so much detail. Now, if I have a lot of times on longer, more flat surfaces that are more, I would say, less interrupted surfaces, like a coffee table type or that type of piece, you can wipe your wax on with your lint-free cloth and then wipe it off. So it's up to you to decide. I kind of bounce back and forth between doing both to see which method I like the best. On big flat surfaces, when you're applying your wax, if it looks a little streaky to you when you're applying it, if you're using a cloth, make sure that your cloth is flattened out as much as possible and not wadded up. And then also give it a day to dry. Like give it your wax a day or so to sit. If it still looks streaky, you can give it a light buff sanding and then apply a second coat. Or you could also mix in a little bit of your paint if your paint was all one color, which you couldn't do it on this. But you could mix in a little bit of paint with a top coat too. And then let that would help smooth out any streaks. And it really just takes working with it. So right here, these are the final photos and final viewings of it and how it came out. It just kind of was jaw-dropping to me when it was all done, and I was really pleased with it. I will take a Q-tip with a little bit of vinegar on it and go over and touch up a couple of places on the wire and mirror where my paint got that, where I didn't want it to get. But here's that old world French modeled look, and I was really happy with the way that it came out. I have this listed on my Etsy at $38.50. It will cost, I'm estimating it costs about 800 maybe to 850 to ship. And so for about 30 hours of work or so, I mean, that'll be it's a good turnaround. It'll be a good profit for this piece, and it's just like a furniture artist's dream to be able to work on something like this. And you can see I was talking about all the mottled colors at the top, that kind of aged vintage appeal. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you so much for coming along with me.